Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us for this very special conversation, roundtable, and book launch. I will be facilitating today. I'm Jenny Dupree, the Crochet Program Coordinator. And my first job is just to hand over to Prof. Kiet, who is the Chair for Critical Studies in Higher Education Transformation and the DVC Engagement and Transformation Portfolio. And he'll just do the welcome for us. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see the young people and old friends also around here. It's great stuff. We're trying to get back, of course, in the what we will call the post-COVID space in the university. It's also just heartwarming to see how people are reconnecting with one another around the university's projects. So it is my pleasure to welcome you today to Burr Street for the launch of From Post-Intersectionality to Black Decolonial Feminism, Black Skin Affections by Prof. Shirley Anne Tate, one of our great friends of our university. You've been with us for a while now, isn't it? I think we will be running into a decade or more by now, isn't it? So give a hand to Prof. Shirley Anne Tate there, Con. Shirley is a Jamaican descendant of African enslaved people. She is a professor in Canada Research Tier 1 in Feminism and Intersectionality in the Sociology Department, University of Alberta, and an honorary professor with Crochet. She is interested in intersectional thinking and draws on Black feminist, gender, critical race, queer, and Caribbean decolonial theory, with an overall focus on Black Atlantic diaspora studies and emerging identifications. This book brings together a number of these themes, to quote from the blurb. Through the focus on skin, Tate provides a groundwork of historical context and theoretical framing to engage more contemporary examples of racist constructions of Blackness and Black bodies. Examining the history of intersectionality, including its present post-intersectionality, the book continues intersectionality's racialized gender critique by developing a Black decolonial feminist approach to cultural readings of Black skin's consumption, racism within body beauty institutions, e.g. modeling, advertising, and beauty pageants, and cultural representations, as well as the effects which keeps anti-Blackness in play. Yeah, that's a mouthful, né? So we're in for a treat. Welcome, Shirley, once again to Mandela University and to Burr Street. We are looking forward to hearing more about this exciting work. And of course, I've started reading it, so it is really great to get into that. Welcome also to our two respondents who have graciously agreed to be part of this conversation. Nombulelo Shange is a sociology lecturer at the University of the Free State. She is a PhD candidate focusing on the themes of indigenous knowledge systems, particularly on ritual and healing practices. Welcome, Nombulelo. Please give her a hand. Nombulelo must come and visit our university very soon, okay? And then, of course, we have Simran Juglal, is a researcher at the Center for Women and Gender Studies. She's our co-host for this event. She holds a Master's of Arts degree in Media Studies, and her research interests include gender studies, film studies, and cultural studies with a specific focus on colorism and skin lightening practices in South Africa. Welcome, Simran. Please give a nice warm welcome. And of course, welcome to all of you who are attending today, both in person and online, to our colleagues from our university, our students, members of the broader community, those joining from other parts of the country and abroad. We hope you will enjoy your time with us today. Please feel welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Prof. And the next thing, Shirley, please, we're looking forward to hearing about your intentions for the book and where the thinking has come from. Thank you.
Just first of all, I want to thank Crochet and Women's and Gender Studies for organizing this book launch for me. It's very unexpected. I'm very honored that I can launch this book here. I won't do another launch, this is it. So, I also find it very difficult to talk about why I wrote a particular book. I do have some scribbled notes here, but I think I'll leave them behind for a bit. Because I think books kind of come to you in, well, to me, in like phases. So I think this book is a culmination of perhaps 20 years of thinking, writing, discussions with people, being influenced by other people's work as well, of course. So it didn't just kind of emerge over the 2-year writing period that it took me to get it finished and submitted. During those 20 years, I've been trying to think, well, what is it that I'm actually doing? I know you might think, oh, you should have known that before you started, but sometimes you really don't know until you write the thing, or until you spend 20 years doing something, and then you think, that's what I've been doing all this time. So all this time, it would appear that what I've been trying to do is to think about what Black feminist decolonial thinking would look like. And I've been doing this over a variety of writings, so this is actually the first time that I've got all of that, I think, into one very small book. I was approached to write a book on intersectionality by Routledge, which is how come this book came into being. At the same time, I'd been wanting to write a book on black skin, just black skin, for many, many years. And of course, black skin and affect for many, many years. So I thought, okay, they want a book on intersectionality. I don't particularly want to do a really long rehashing of intersectionality theory, etc., because a lot of people much better than me have written on that for so long. So I was trying to think of how to align my interest in affect with Black feminist thought, but also pulling in, Caribbean decolonial theory, because that's something else I've been trying to also use a lot more. And those who know me will know that the reason I do that is because of a very annoying comment that was made to me by a colleague in the UK, which was basically, no theory has ever come out of the Caribbean. So ever since then, which was probably maybe 15 years ago, I've spent my time showing just how much theory comes out of the Caribbean. We use it, we never cite the people, we think it's ours, but it's actually not. It came from somewhere else. And not just that, I mean, decolonial theory from the Caribbean is intriguing, really generative, and it really speaks to me in a way, probably because I'm still grounded in that context as a Jamaican, so I'm still grounded there, so I feel I can understand it much better than the purely Latin American decolonial theory. So that kind of gives you some idea of why I wrote the book, where it kind of comes from. But when I was thinking about it, I thought, well, one of the things I mustn't forget to say, because there's always things you mustn't forget to say when you write a book, right? Otherwise you forget it. One of the things I mustn't forget to say is the reason why I've got Black feminist decolonial is very purposive. I have that because for me, Black feminist theory has always been decolonial, even though it's not claimed as decolonial and people don't talk about it as decolonial. If you think about what decolonial means, the D in decolonial means the removal of colonial thinking. So for me, the mere fact that Black feminist theories point of reference, and intersectionality is also actually, because intersectionality I also claim to be decolonial theorizing. If you think about the focus of this body of work, it's been on Black women as human, which, as you know, that was itself a revolutionary idea. And that was a very decolonial idea because it kind of shifted the line of vision from Eurocentric whiteness and white women onto seeing Black women as knowledge producers and people who had something to say about every aspect of life, and also whose life experiences were valid as data, say, if you want to call it data, were valid platforms for theorizing from. So that's one of the things I hope I didn't forget to say in the book. I was reading it feverishly this morning until I just arrived here just a few minutes ago. I still haven't finished, I'm so sorry. And I already noticed like 2 mistakes, not of meaning or anything like that, just where they put the brackets in the wrong place. Okay, well, I'm a bit kind of, yeah. I'm not sure I want to say anything more, but yes, one last thing. And of course, it's taken the form it's taken. So in the introduction, I do something very specific, which is to talk about the tendencies that have led me to this work. So Black feminism, of course, is one tendency. Also, Afro-pessimism, Black United States thinking is another tendency. So you see fugitivity in there in terms of reading into and reading from. You see maroonage in there, which is Black Caribbean kind of thinking about removing yourselves from the plantation, whether that's a psychic or a physical or a socio-political journey. And then you also see errantry in there, which is directly, in case nobody's ever told you and they've just put it in their text as if it's their idea, it's directly from Edward Glissant's ideas about, archipelagic thinking, I think. So those are just to say, these are my kind of tendencies, and it's always about how to build new Black futures. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shirley. So we'll hand over to Nombulelo now to give her first response to the parts of the book that she has read. Thank you.
Thank you. I focused on chapter 1, which is Black Skin Affections, Black Feminist Decolonial Reading into Freedom. And I focused on chapter 4 as well, which is White Fear - Hate of Black men's bodies, masculinity, and skin affective politics. Okay. So what was interesting in the discussion or in reading the book was the juxtaposition of the COVID-19 tolls, especially in chapter 1, on Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's murder and the resultant uprising. It reminded me of a lot of the parallels for here in South Africa as well, and some of the confusions and contradictions that were taking place at the time. In terms of the local South African context, I think mine and a lot of South Africans' expectation was that the state and various social structures would take better care of its citizens, especially those who are marginalized and most resource deprived, which places them at greater risk of contracting and spreading COVID-19. Instead, the response was to treat already marginalized Black bodies as sites of violence. Military was quickly deployed into predominantly Black townships, where we witnessed violent scenes that could best be described as almost resembling the most violent moments of apartheid South Africa between the 60s and 80s. The increased violence against Blackness, not just the Black bodies, but the Black communities, Black freedom, rights, and so on, was also illustrated in the death of Mthokozi Sindumba. He was an innocent bystander who was shot and killed by police during a standoff between protesting university students in Johannesburg. The predominantly Black protesters were fighting for their right to education. The public discourse, especially on social media, when these and other events took place, was interesting because it was unquestioningly embracing the hate or fear of Blackness, even amongst Black people. People blamed Black students for Ndumba's death or questioned why people were being disobedient during the lockdown, even as they were being attacked by soldiers in their unfenced yards or homes. The internalized hate and ridicule of Blackness and the Black skin in particular amongst Black South Africans has started to create a violent and dangerous anti-Black narrative which perpetuates Afrophobic hate. A quote by Kwame Anthony Appiah encapsulates the struggles that Black South Africans face when it comes to their skin and self-acceptance. And he says, Black children raised within the racist cultural assumption of the colonial system are partly resolved in the tension between contempt of Blackness and their own dark skin by coming to think of themselves in some sense as white. There are many things that cause this Afrophobic violence towards other African migrants in South Africa, but Black skin or dark skin is quite significant. Its significance in the South African context is deeply seated in the birth date race classification, where skin alone could determine your place in society, your access, career, income, what kind of community you live in, schools you go to, and so on. This intergenerational trauma that we've weaponized against migrants from different African countries has created a divide amongst us as Africans. The danger of using arbitrary divides like skin to maintain colonial separatism is that, again, we isolate ourselves from the continent and from the rich histories and the process of relearning that is taking place, especially under the context of the decolonial discussions. The dangers are also wide-reaching, and they include tensions between the states and a myriad of things that we rely on in terms of interaction between different African states and other social interactions, as well as even things like mineral resources that sometimes in South Africa we rely on other countries to get, tourism and partnerships that are formed along those lines that help enrich even our own local economies. But the danger that I want to momentarily focus on is the danger towards ourselves as Black South Africans. And this is the threat to our own identity and the important spiritual connection we have to other parts of the continent. Through my scholarship, I've been lucky enough to work with African traditionalists, cultural leaders, healers like Izangoma and mountain doctors who have pluralistic identities and pull from their Khoi and San ancestry, elements of Nguni practices, Rastafarianism, and many others. What is interesting in their practices is the similarities and the connections to different cultures across the continent. Pre-colonial Khoi and San cultural groups in regions like Damaland, which is essentially modern day Namibia, Namakwa land, which is essentially parts of modern day South Africa within the Northern Cape region, and Cape, which is essentially the Cape and parts of the Western Cape region. These groups frequently interacted with each other. The interactions could go as far as Angola. Those in the Cape during slavery and many of the frontier wars that were fought in the build-up to the scramble of Africa would frequently flee to places like modern-day Namibia to escape colonial oppression and violence. Many of those who migrated to these regions had close ties with the place. Some even had families there to welcome them. The colonial era also saw a long period of forced migration all over the continent, even across different Nguni groups, not just within the Khoi and San context. But these migrations were taking place long before the first European settlers arrived. What is interesting here in the journey that many traditional African healers have to embark on when they realize that they have an ancestral calling to heal is that the calling requires them to learn and perform various rituals, gain knowledge on plant medicine, ecology, African cosmology, and many other things. The common thread between most of these things is the idea of returning to self. The self in this case could be the individual's essence or Accra, as the Akani people coin it. The South is also family, ancestral past, community, and important locations and sites. The South is also ecology and the spiritual links we have with it. The South is even things like embracing the aesthetic elements of Africanness or Blackness, like our diverse skin shades, or liberating and celebrating African hair, which can even be found in African independent church practices like the Shembe Church's practices and ideologies. For some South Africans, it is during this journey to the South, while trying to answer their ancestral calling, that shows them that their origins are not here. They realize that their South is not restricted by colonial borders that determine modern day states. It then means they have to journey to find the South. Their journey to the South often means a return to home, which is another important dimension of the South in the African culture and religious ideology. The healer must rediscover the new, yet old and unfamiliar version of home. This might mean journeying to Zimbabwe, Congo, Nigeria, Mozambique, and many other regions that experience the most hate and violence from South Africans when people from these regions live here. The severity of this journey to the South is quite significant to Sangomas, but many Africans might be faced with it at some varying degree at some point in their lives. Some questions I had while reading the chapters and reflecting on my own study around these challenges is the danger not greater for us when we sever the umbilical cord that connects us to home and the South? What does it mean for individuals and South Africans as a whole when they realize that home is a place or a people that they carry deep hate for? Is it worth disrupting this important journey that our ancestors seem to be guiding us towards over trivial things like falsely connecting dark skin and its negative association to only those outside of South Africa? This association of dark skin to foreignness resembles the discussion on simplification that emerges within the chapters, where the dark skin is associated with crime, drugs, violence, especially in the case of South Africa, and many social ills that South Africans will often scapegoat to other African nationals. Biko has a similar discussion to simplification, which he coins as swart khafa. Swart khafa is an Afrikaans term which means black danger. Biko says whiteness will often attach the country's inhumanity to Blackness and Black men in particular. This creates an irrational and unjustifiable fear of Blackness and attaches Blackness to violence, danger, and criminality. These harmful stereotypes extend even to young boys, which is evident in middle-aged white men recently having a full-on fistfight and attempting to drown 14 and 18-year-old Black boys here in the Free State during the December holidays. Or we see it in recent events from January, where a police constable raped her 10-year-old son and shared the videos on social media. Many took it upon themselves to debate whether or not he had consented, despite the fact that he was far below the legal age of consent, and the abuse came from his mother, someone who wields a lot of power and influence in his life. Society saw these young boys as grown men who can fend for themselves. This robs young boys of their childhood and sadly reinforces the zombification attached to Black men as violent and impenetrable things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nombulelo. I'll go on then to Simran for her response.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. And a special thank you to Professor Tate for this truly insightful exploration into decolonial feminism and anti-Blackness. There's a fascinating yet unsettling paradox when it comes to the skin. It is our body's largest organ that protects us from the elements and that allows us to experience sensations of heat, cold, and touch. However, the skin is also a site of danger, of damage, and of decades-long dehumanization. When we think about the skin, we cannot separate this organ from the colonial hierarchies that deemed black and dark skin as inferior, weak, and uncivilized. The skin shows us what it means to be human, but it also tells us who is considered human. Professor Tate talks about the skin as an interplay of the politics of race, gender, sexuality, class, ability, age, beauty, and belonging. And in societies where race is inextricably linked to politics, the connotations associated with black skin emerge from the meanings assigned to white skin. If white skin is desirable, then black skin is undesirable. If white skin is civilized, then black skin is savage. If white skin is powerful, then black skin is powerless. These dichotomies become all the more problematic when we look at the intersections between skin color and gender. European colonialism was heterosexualized, cisgendered, and male, and ironically enough, the European colonists deemed the colonized Africans as not civilized enough to have gender distinctions in their societies. Africans may not have had rigid gender distinctions and roles, but during colonial rule, black African skin was rendered feminine, in contrast to the masculinity of white European skin. The colonial race-gender hierarchies placed white men and women above colonized men and women. It excluded African women from land ownership and state structures, and constructed the African body as flesh without humanity. These hierarchies persist to varying degrees in our post-colonial and feminist present, in what François Vergès terms as civilizational feminism. This is a feminism that is Western, that is neoliberal, and that is capitalist, and that centers whiteness in its so-called empowerment and activism. This centering of whiteness occurs because white feminists remove themselves from systems of racism and white supremacy while also appropriating the language of intersectionality. When we center whiteness in our feminism, we not only maintain the colonial race-gender hierarchies, but we also demonstrate a clear privileging of whiter or lighter skin tones. Colorism, or intraracial discrimination, is a salient example of anti-Blackness that privileges colonial aesthetics, and especially white skin, over dark or black skin, and allows those with lighter or whiter skin tones to accumulate racial and social capital. Throughout the chapters, Professor Tate engages with colorism as a complex and continuing colonial matter of the skin. Colorism deems darker skin as undesirable, inferior, and ugly. It is therefore no surprise that the global skin lightening industry was valued at $7 billion in 2021. But even when we valorize dark and black skin in our rejections of anti-Blackness, colorism, and race-gender hierarchies, it is incredibly easy to fall into the capitalist trap of commodifying black skin. When we talk about the skin and the body, we are also talking about aesthetics. And in chapter 3 of the book, Racialized Fascination, Modeling and Skin Shade, Professor Tate uses the example of the fashion and modeling industries to highlight this commodification and consumption of black bodies. She explains that models are part of a global aesthetic workforce in which their body parts, their faces, their lips, their hands, their feet, their legs, their teeth, and their skin adorn advertisements and occupy catwalks from Milan to London, to Paris, to Tokyo, to New York, to Sao Paulo, to Seoul, and to the Caribbean. Racism is deeply embedded in the fashion and modeling industries, and even when black models are able to gain a spot on the catwalk, Their bodies are racialized, cannibalized, and consumed by audiences. From slave auctions to medical experiments performed on the bodies of slave women, Black bodies have been exploited throughout our recent histories. So the global fashion industry's commodification and consumption of Black bodies should not come as a surprise. The bodies of the Black models allowed entrance into the fashion world are deemed aesthetically valuable, and therefore they are profitable. But it is here that Black bodies remain trapped within racial capitalism, a capitalism that excludes Black models from monetizing their talents. So the models, or the aesthetic laborers, create cultural, social, political, and economic capital for the design houses, and later for the consumers who purchase these clothes and accessories. Once the fashion houses' pockets have been lined, the Black model's body ceases to have value. That is until the next fashion show. So where do we go from here? We often look to intersectionality to understand the complexities of racism, of colorism, of sexism, and all the other social isms. Professor Tate suggests that instead of seeing intersectionality as an adding together of sociocultural categories, we should instead focus on how race, skin color, class, gender, ability, sexuality, and age produce new social positionings. Drawing again from Vergès, intersectionality has always been decolonial and works to remove feminism from its white bourgeois life to show alliance with the women of the global South. As such, decolonial feminism rejects misogyny and misogynoir, homophobia and transphobia. It rejects anti-Blackness, ableism, and classism to envision a world without the limitations and harms of white supremacy. The new social positionings that result from intersectionality are seen in feminist movements across the globe. Caribbean feminism, for example, emerges from the racialized and gendered histories of Caribbean peoples, and it is located within anti-colonial struggles. Indo-Caribbean feminisms were born from indenture and post-indenture experiences and are embedded in the cross-ethnic solidarities and the intersections between Indianness, Caribbeanness, gender, and feminism. As stated by Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So we look to Black feminist decolonial thought as a practice of liberation and as a means to move beyond colonial knowledge systems and praxis. We need to move away from the colonial idea that deems Black bodies as flesh without humanity, and that deems Black bodies existing mainly or solely for our cannibalization and consumption. Our skin still marks us for privilege or marginalization. It marks us for humanization or dehumanization, and it marks us for life and death. So I implore you all to engage with this brilliant read. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simran. So the next portion of our program is meant to be a conversation between Prof. Tate and the two respondents. So I'd like to open that by just giving Prof. Tate a chance to respond to the responses. If you have any questions for the respondents about their contributions also.
No, I don't have questions. I just want to thank you both so much for engaging with my text. It's always interesting to see how people read what you've written, and I don't very often get a chance to do that. So that's been really great. And I'm really pleased that you related it also to your own work and to the South African context. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks so much, Shirley. Simran, can I give you a chance to perhaps pose some questions to Prof. Tate? I think we might have lost Nombulelo temporarily due to technical difficulties.
I have a few questions, so we can start with that. How do we go about representing Black bodies in the media without cannibalizing and consuming them?
Thank you for that question. It's a really important one, and one, of course, that can't be answered just like in a one-liner or a one-worder, which would be "don't do it," right? You could do that as well. Because that question implies that we have to undergo a whole societal change, a massive societal transformation of how Black bodies are seen and how they've been constructed over centuries in the Western Hemisphere. So that would make it difficult, I think, to say this is what we should do. I think one of the ways that we could do it is to do readings of the representations like I've tried to do, and many other people have done this before me. I'm not the only person that's done that. To try and do readings of this representation to show what they're about, actually. Because I think each thing must be like a learning experience for those who would do the representations. But if you think about it, though, think about something like Sambo. When I wrote my book, because is she back? No, it's just me. She spoke about the Samboification of society, and I wrote a book called Decolonizing Sambo a few years ago, and that was what struck me about it. The centuries that it's been to make this representation of Blackness called Sambo, but how very widespread it is globally. You know, it's not just from the United States, which is where a lot of people would place that. In the Caribbean it was, in Australia it was, you know. In the whole of Europe it is still, well, it still is there, this thing that's supposed to represent us. So how do you get rid of something like that, which has such an incredible life in popular culture? So that, for example, when we see something like blackface, I don't do it because I don't relate to that, but a lot of people relate to blackface in a way like, this is so funny, let me laugh. And that includes Black people, people of color as well, because we're all implicated in racist culture. None of us are outside it, unfortunately. But I've been in cinemas where I've heard explosions of laughter around me, like when I went to watch Jumanji, which is in the book, explosions of laughter around me from the whole cinema, just, you know, getting creased up because it was funny. But I just couldn't laugh. And I remember looking at my daughter and saying to her, "Do you find this funny?" And she said, "No, I can't see what's funny about that." So that's what led me to actually include that within the book itself, because I see writing as something that's got to be about producing teachable moments in terms of anti-racist struggle. So that's what I would hope that people who do representations would do, just pause and think about it. But then, you know, white epistemologies of ignorance kind of get in the way, to quote Charles Mills, they kind of get in the way. And sometimes people say, I can't see why this is so problematic. You have to teach people constantly, which becomes a bit of a pain, doesn't it? So I'm sorry for that kind of long-winded talk around your question, but it's because I don't know the answer. And if I find out one day, I'll get in touch.
Thank you so much for that. Another question I have is, how can we practice decolonial Black feminism in the midst of the culture wars from the global north that often filters through to the global south?
Yeah. That's a really important question, not just for South Africa, but as you say, for the global north as well. We'll remember that during the Trump presidency, one of the things that he did as part of his reaction to BLM was to say, basically, he doesn't think that intersectionality should be taught in universities, critical race theory shouldn't be taught in universities either, and he was going to try and find a way of stopping them from being taught in universities, because he found them to be fomenters of dissent or something. He wouldn't have said fomenters of dissent, because I don't think he knows what that phrase might mean, but anyway, sorry. Sorry to Trump supporters in the audience, I hope there aren't any. Anyway, and that kind of spread in a really interesting way, because this is pure white supremacist right-wing propaganda, right? And it spread in a really interesting way from the United States then to Europe. So in the UK, we had Boris Johnson's Conservatives saying, yeah, we don't agree with critical race theory, that's not going to be taught in a university here, and it won't be taught in schools. We don't agree with intersectionality either, which spread across the continent and into Scandinavia. And so in France, there were discussions about the problem of post-coloniality and intersectionality. Same in Germany, the problems of post-coloniality and intersectionality. And you see issues like that being discussed, and you think intersectionality is a theory that's been used a lot. Critical race theory is a theory that's been used a lot. What possible threat do they pose to white supremacy, right? Because that was an incredible reaction, I thought, to Black thought itself. And so that just makes you know how powerful they are then in terms of shaking the edifice of white supremacy, because they make us think about how racism continues in the afterlife of enslavement, for example, how systematic and systemic racism is, like anti-Black racism, of course, is what they're focused on, but all racisms, right? Very systemic and very structural. And make us know that there is still a lot to be done in order to guarantee Black freedom, or the freedom of all oppressed groups, in fact, because, Black feminists have always said, and not just Black feminists, a lot of Black liberation thought is about none of us are free until all of us are free, right? So for me, I think we should cherish what intersectionality has given us, and we should do a fight back against its dissenters. So, for example, now in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis has just passed a law. It was the same guy that said, don't say gay, right? You can't talk about being queer in schools in Florida. So this is just the usual right-wing kind of conservative agenda. And he said, right, he's going to stop critical race theory and intersectionality being taught in state universities in the state of Florida. So if the state of Florida funds the university, those things are not going to be taught. The same guy who says African American history must not be taught in a school. So this is the context that we have in the North, right? An incredible fight back by whiteness against Black thought. So you have to think to yourself, please don't import it to South Africa, because you'd be importing something that speaks against you and what you believe in. Keep it away at all costs, right? We shouldn't have here something like Kimberly Crenshaw wrote. Kimberly Crenshaw is amazing, isn't she, really? She's a member of the, African American Policy Forum. And if you ever want to see a really good set of videos online about Black life in the United States, watch Under the Black Light. Watch that. That's her and the African American Policy Forum. After Trump did that fight back against intersectionality, she wrote to everybody. I got an email too, not that she knows me personally, I'm just on the mailing list. It would be nice to know her personally, I'm sure. So she wrote to everybody on the mailing list to say this is what was happening, and began to say the different states in the United States are already begun to put laws into motion to stop this aspect of black thought being even having gained entry through the door. So I can't say don't. When people in South Africa, because things tend to go around, don't they, and things get kind of popularized elsewhere and come here and then or other parts, and then you've got to think, well, what does it really mean, and do I want to buy into this particular politics? Just remember where the intersectionality politics comes from. It comes from a deep-seated anti-Blackness, which you don't want. Sorry, Jenny, that was a bit like preaching. Sorry about that.
I think that it's well warranted in this particular case. I wanted to check if Nombulelo is able to connect in, because I believe she has a question for Prof. Tate and maybe some inputs as well.
Hi, yes, weirdly enough, my question is chapters that I didn't pick. I was a bit torn with the discussions also on colorism. I find it to be an interesting thing to engage with and unpack, especially in the modern day context where, unlike historically, you see this emergence of Black women and women of color almost unquestioningly embracing this market that is booming and emerging. And my main interaction with that space has been through the ecological justice sort of dimension, where we looked at what some of these products have in them and the impacts and the effect that they have on nature and wildlife, in particular our oceans. And I just want to maybe get some thoughts, comments, insights from you, the contradictions of these like two parallels where environmental justice challenges often negatively impact women of color the most. And then you have this other dimension or parallel where, of course, there's a deeper historical thing to consider of Blackness and the Black skin being hated. But yeah, this almost unquestioning embrace or emergence of skin lightening industries and practices.
Thank you. And maybe Simran would like to say something too, because she's doing her work on that topic. I can say something, you can say something, we can share it out, okay? This is one of those questions where I can say, oh, I've done that already. You know, like on cooking programs where you kind of bring out the pie that's been made beforehand. Anyway, yeah, I do have one of those pies. I did do a small book several years ago now on skin lightening in the Black Atlantic, because for me it was a really important topic, and I'll tell you why I did that book at the time. At the time when I did that book, there was still a lot of discussion which was pathologizing Black women who lightened their skin as being people who hated their skin color. And I don't particularly subscribe to that. I would think we have to look at the society, and that makes women feel they have to do that, right? So it's more for me the society that's got a problem, not necessarily the practitioners of skin lightening as such. You might think to yourself, that's a strange position for me to have, but it's because I believe that there's something called agency, and I don't want to interfere with people's agency. I do know about skin lightening and that it is quite a dangerous practice, and I know the kinds of risks that women, men, children too, undergo or put themselves in like front of when they engage in these practices. But for me, one of the important things to remember, of course, is that it's not just Black women, Black men and Black children that do skin lightening. It's a global practice, as Simran says, $6 million a year in 2021. It's not just us, it's a whole kind of human thing, a whole global human thing. But what interested me about that is it's one part of that whole humanity that gets siphoned off and problematized because of skin lightening. That's us as Black women, right? They don't look at, for example, white women who also practice skin lightening through the use of chemicals like glutathione, for example. It's always about poor Black women who feel they have, well, not even poor, but Black women who feel they have to make their skin lighter in order to have a certain appearance which they think gives them more value in the society in which they live. So for example, I'm a Jamaican, Andre said that at the beginning. In Jamaica, race and class are intimately interconnected, and the way in which people judge class in Jamaica is to look at your skin and see exactly what skin color you've got. We don't have the colonial names anymore. Like you won't hear people say Sambo, mulatto, any of this kind of stuff, yellow, red. We don't, maybe red still exists, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, we don't use those color terms anymore. But what we have is people read your skin and go, well, you're brown skin, you know, you're light skin, you're a brown and whatever. So that means then that you must be a middle class person. So as a middle class person then, that gives you access to a lot of stuff still in Jamaica, because Jamaica is still a really anti-black skin, anti-dark skin society, right? Just like many other places. That's part of the colonial legacy, I know. And you might think, why is Shirley criticizing her country? It's because it needs to be criticized on this level, right? So anyway, so lighter skin gives you access to things like jobs, networks that can give you stuff, and of course the possibility that you do come from a family that's well off, where you don't have to work from the age of 10, where you also have the possibility of going to school and getting an education, going to university, where you have the possibility that you will not have a teenage pregnancy, though it's not always guaranteed, you know. So lighter skin in my context gives you stuff. So you can see then, I'm not the only person who said this, a really good paper was published by Winifred Brown-Glaude many years ago, and she said that skin lightening is hooked into the race, class, caste, nearly, kind of distinctions in Jamaica and elsewhere, I have to say. Not just Jamaica, I just use that as an example because I feel I can speak about that more intimately because I know it a bit better. Do you want to say something, Simran?
I think I'll just add a little bit on colorism from the South African context. So South Africa has a very layered history with colorism and skin lightening. We actually saw a lot of black and colored women using skin lightening products during British colonial rule in South Africa. And then, of course, during apartheid, where your skin color would actually, and your hair texture and other physical features can actually lead to you being classified as black, Indian, or colored, or for some lighter skinned people of color, you could actually pass as white. So it goes again to what Prof Tate is saying about light skin being affording you socio-economic mobility and access. Interestingly enough, in the 1980s, the skin lightening industry in South Africa was highly regulated, and that was because of the Black consciousness movement and other anti-apartheid movements of the time, and they collaborated with the health sector in South Africa to ban some of the more harmful ingredients in the skin lightening products, such as hydroquinone, such as mercury and lead that has been in these products for centuries. So South Africa was one of the first countries in the world to actually ban skin lightening advertising and to start regulating the local skin lightening industry. And yet, if we look at skin lightening practices nowadays, I think the latest research is that 35% of Black and Indian women in South Africa continue to lighten their skin. And even when they suffer chemical burns or liver damage or kidney failure because of these products, they still report having high levels of satisfaction with their skin. So we really need to ask ourselves, to what extent are we actually going to damage our bodies and our skin to gain access to resources and mobility?
Thank you so much. Nombulelo, before I hand over to the Q&A, would you like to respond to those answers or ask any further questions?
I think I'd like to hear some of the insights from the audience. I'm good on my end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to the audience for questions for Prof Tate and the respondents. You can maybe just give your name when you ask a question and who the question is directed towards. To those joining us on Zoom, please feel free to pop your questions in the chat and I will relay them. And I'll actually start with a few Zoom questions. Nancy Morkel has a question for you, Shirley. And she's referring, I think, directly to your book. She says, in chapter 2, you discuss the sacrosanct nature of white women's bodies.
No, I'm just laughing because Nancy's so precise in chapter 2.
Yes, Nancy came prepared. Hello, Nancy. She talks about, you discuss the sacrosanct nature of white women's bodies through a detailed reading of Ruby from Lovecraft Country. Could you relate this interpretation of white women being protected and elevated within the university space and how they are black academics, she's talking about male ones specifically, who pander to their white colleagues and manages racist views of the world, the university, etc., at the expense of the dignity of other black academics, and as a result of their alignment with or protection of problematic white women academics, they gain leadership positions at the expense of a black vision for the university or a vision for a decolonial or decolonizing university. Can we decolonize the sacrosanct nature of whiteness in a university with such dynamics at play and unchallenged? And I think she also even gave a quote. Yes, the quote to which I refer. Scene 1 shows the power of a white woman's skin to both demand and receive protection from black men/people. It also illustrates that protection of white women by the white state through aggressive male police presence and their threat of anti-black violence in defense of white women is a societal given when white women are held up as sacrosanct. So maybe I'll give you a chance to answer that and then take questions from the floor. Thank you.
Nancy, I don't know if you're listening, but what an amazing question. One that would probably take a good book chapter to talk about, actually. So thank you for that question. White women are held up as sacrosanct in the university space. Who would agree with that? Yeah, we all would. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. There's been a recent report from in the United Kingdom about the university workforce. You know, they always do these reports, like every year they do a report. And what does that new report show? What we know, because we can see it ourselves. Most of the professoriate is white men. The part of the professoriate that has grown most in numbers is white women. Then black men next, then black women at the bottom. So black women continue to be the least in number of the professoriate. Oh, I forgot Asian colleagues. And by Asian, we mean in the UK, like Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi descent people. So, yes, yeah, white women are sacrosanct, but I've never understood why that is the case, actually. Who understands that? Anybody understand that? No. Women are sacrosanct in my view, all women, but yeah, white women continue to be sacrosanct and they need to be protected. They need to have a range of protections from other people, like black women like me who are armed, dangerous, and very angry, right? So they need to be protected constantly. Their femininity has to be always preserved and their kind of psychic states have to be, you know, gently managed. That has been my experience in the UK. White women can never be thought to be at fault, and we all have to make sure they're okay at all times. That's our job. Our job as black people, black women specifically, and black men too, in institutions is to make sure white people always feel at ease and at home, because of course that is their institution. It doesn't belong to anyone else. It's not ours. So even though we're marginalized, we're still expected to do this deep emotional labor. Because if we don't, we fail somewhat in our duties as humans to other humans. Of course, we never see this being repeated the other way around. We're not seen as sacrosanct. We are abused on a daily basis. Nancy, I hope I'm not reading anything into what you've said about what you've experienced. If I am my sister, I give you a hug from here, yeah? I hope you feel it. Because of course we still have black women academics experiencing really egregious racism and attacks on a daily basis in institutions all over the Western Hemisphere. Nowhere is safe. Why is it that as black women we go to work, we're okay when we get there, right? Because we've had a great evening at home, we've seen our mates, had a drink or two or a glass of water, that's what I do, gone to the gym, just had an ordinary life. You get to work next day, and the minute you step into that university, it's like the battle begins. It's a constant fight. Why? I have to say, I don't see my white feminist colleagues fighting for much, because it's always given. It's given because it's seen to be their kind of right to have it. So you can hear from my biting tones that it's something I have to say, I share with you, Nancy, this kind of impatience with the inequalities that exist and the kind of the fire that black women always reap, even though they don't want it. And that means that black men have to do something about that. To all the black men in the audience, you've got to do something. Fix up, as we'd say in Jamaica, support your black sisters, or don't bother, right? Yeah. Just step to the side and let us deal with it, right? Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Shirley. Okay, can I take 3 hands from the audience if there are questions? Okay, we've got one at the back. It's 1, 2, and 3. Thanks. Let me go this way.
I wanted to comment on, sorry, okay, now you can, thank you for the platform. As I stated, my name is Tando Soga, come from Claude Cavana residence. I'm a leader there. I wanted to comment on, since we're speaking about people of color, looking at the current state of affairs for my people, what do you think is it that is lacking with regards to my people? Because I am looking in a sense of, when we talk about my people, I actually want to comment in the sense of black consciousness, where we sought, I like to believe that my people sought to infuse themselves with pride, also looking into their value systems, looking also into their cultures and outlook of life. But for black pride to become a tangible goal, I believe that something at the level of understanding has to happen. And what is that thing? And I believe Uguti as well, Uguti, so long as we look at other people of color or people outside the country, because I've noted that you've mentioned America and the UK a lot of times, I think that my people are in trouble if they sought out for leadership looking at other countries. So speaking in terms of Africa, and coming also as an African man, what do you think is it that is lacking for my people, looking at the current position in which the country is at? And do you think, Okuti, you are also best qualified to speak on behalf of my people? I just want to understand that. Who do you think is best qualified to speak on behalf of my people? Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Do you want to respond, or can I take the other? Can I take the other 2 first?
Can I respond?
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. I don't think I'm qualified to speak about your people at all. I would never dream of doing that. What I speak about is context that I know a bit about, because I either live in them or I research on them or I read other people's work on them, right? So no, I can't make prescriptions for your people, but what I can say is what I share in my heart and in my mind is a conviction that I am part of the African diaspora. So for me, black liberation as such is important. So I would say for our people, black liberation is important, although of course we have to recognize the differences within that. That also mean that sometimes our liberation is imperiled because of how we see each other and relate to each other in colonial terms. I will give you an example. Frantz Fanon in, I think, 1953 or whenever it was, I haven't got it in my head, he wrote he wrote an article that was published in like a more magazine kind of format. And what he talked about was how colonialism works to divide the West Indian, as we were once called, we're Caribbean people, but we were once called West Indian under colonial rule, and African people from the continent. We're all African people, right? We're African people from the continent. What colonialism did was it instilled in West Indians, like I would have been, the idea that we were not Negroes. Sorry to use that word, it's offensive, I know. We were not Negroes. The Negroes were in Africa. So that is the kind of colonized mentality that Caribbean people would have once had. And I hope it's gone, but I'm afraid it hasn't, right? Because there's some Caribbean people who still refuse to call themselves African or African descent. They will not embrace that because of where they live and the kind of negations of being African that are still in existence, even though there's a wholesale embrace also nationally. Anyway, so. But when these West Indians and Africans went to France, the metropole, what did they find? They were all Negroes. So to me, right, I would prefer to embrace being black with my black brothers and sisters, wherever they might be in the world, rather than to be a white man's Negro. That is how I see it. So for me, our black liberation must insist that even though we have differences, we have to look at exactly what is the fight against. It's not against each other, that's for sure. It's against white supremacy and racism, anti-Blackness that is global in its scope, that impacts all of us. It doesn't matter where we live. It doesn't matter our class. It doesn't matter our gender, our sexuality, our age, right? Oh God, I nearly broke out into Jamaican, sorry. I'm like, you won't get this, let me stop now. Wherever we are, you know, we're still that black nothing, irrespective of how we've been brought up in our communities by our families and our loved ones. That is what we are. When white people see us, they see a blackness that they can't get past. They've created us in kind of their kind of psychic projection as the same black nothing. So no, I have to say, you're right. Keep those ideas elsewhere. Here in South Africa, you have enough black liberation ideology and ideas to free your country. Well, to free the world. Steve Biko, free the world in many ways, right? And I appreciate that work and in an incredible way. And because of my interactions here in South Africa, I've begun to understand the idea of Ubuntu, right? And I know some people don't agree with it, and some people say it's rubbish, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that I really like about it is to say, you know, we recognize each other as humans, right? You're a human, I'm a human. Whereas under colonialism, we've always been denied our humanity as black people, irrespective of where we are. So for me, that is a massive kind of life learning thing that can be offered to the world. So thank you for your question.
Thanks, Shirley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Prof, and the two panelists, and also everyone joining virtually. Right, so, sorry. I stand on two commentaries that were made by Simran and Nombulelo pertaining to the implications of skin lightening, that we are endangering ourselves and well-being, not only the physical, but also psychologically, spiritually. We lose our identity, right? But my question is, what is the solution? I'm not sure if it has been answered or not, but what is the solution for South Africans to reaffirm themselves, their identity, provided that due to colonialism, we were made to believe that being light is supreme, it's gold, right? And obviously, this matter at hand, it's deemed a continuous matter, right? And Prof mentioned that the way we could get to so many people reaching out to them, telling them the importance of acknowledging who they are, their identity, is through writing. But besides that, is there any other particular method that could be implemented to reach an entire range of audience at large? Because not everyone is going to be reading and all that. So that's my question. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
I'm going to do a little one, and then Simran's going to do another one. Writing is one thing, but what we have to remember as well, of course, is that different governments across the Black Atlantic diaspora and on the African continent have also been doing education campaigns, like in Jamaica was Don't Murder the Skin, so similar campaigns like that, to highlight the dangers of skin lightening, skin bleaching specifically, right? And those haven't really worked. Why? Because they haven't been able to tackle the underlying societal issues of the link between skin color and disadvantage. So of course they haven't worked. And because they've been just thinking about skin lightening as something that has to do with negative black psychology, like people who lighten their skin want to be white, or they want to be really, really pale, or something like that. The thing is, I don't think that we're dopes. As black people, we know we can never be white because of the way in which race works and racism works. We know we can never be white people because white still figures itself as, or race is still figured as very biological. So we can never be white. It doesn't matter how pale skinned we are, we're still black people because of the one drop rule, especially in former colonial settings as well. So I would go back again to the need to change society. The need to change the intimate connection between skin color and class status and possibilities for like social mobility. And Simran said the same, didn't you? I'll let Simran.
Thank you so much for the question. So in terms of tackling colorism, I do feel like we actually need to position colorism and skin lightening practices as not only a social justice issue or a racial justice issue, but it is a health concern. Of course, that means collaborating with the healthcare system in South Africa, with dermatologists, to actually create campaigns to educate people about the dangers of skin lightening. Recent research shows that people who engage, especially women who engage in skin lightening in South Africa, they are unaware of all of the dangers of it. And by the time they realize how dangerous it is, their skin has already been damaged. So I think situating it as also a healthcare issue rather than just a social justice issue can actually help alleviate some of the problems with colorism. But of course, on the flip side, I think Professor Tate was talking about agency as well. As much as we can create awareness, lead education campaigns, etc., if an individual person decides that they want to lighten their skin to gain a job, to gain a romantic partner, to increase their life satisfaction, we actually cannot stop them from doing so. We can give them the tools and resources to think about these things, but again, people have agency.
Thank you. There's just a little addition here, and then we'll go to the next question.
The addition is that I forgot to introduce myself. I am Boitumelo Penelope Mosheti, and I'm representing Sarah Batman residents.
Thank you. Next question, thanks.
Hi, how are you? Hi, how's everyone? How are you, Prof? The reason I'm standing, more than being a question, it's a comment on something that I read this morning. So I was scrolling through TikTok, I was scrolling through Instagram, and then I keep seeing these sit-downs and these conversations about patriarchy, men versus women, power of mobility, freedom of mobility, women doing what they want to do, wearing what they want to wear, consciousness of their power in the 21st century in this day and age. So ultimately the person asked these very critical questions, and in response, there's a lady that posted this. She said, women, are 51% of the population. Women, but they are 70% of the poor. And they're 83% of single parents, doing 66% of the work, producing 50% of the food, but earn just 11% of the pay. And only just 1% own the land, in case you wondered why we still need feminism. So, very conscious of what she said in this statement makes so much sense. That really are the statistics of the reality. But now, my question altogether is, I think I have two separate questions from this. Number one, do you, Prof, in your opinion, the devil being, is it feminism versus patriarchy because of colonialism? Do you think it is feminism versus patriarchy, or is feminism and patriarchy versus, are we being made and segregated within ourselves such that we have taken and identified ourselves that men are against women are against men, patriarchal, how this lady put so much emphasis on what you're sitting on, what you're wearing, what you're using has been made and created by men. So this lady responded in this question. So for me, that was my first question. Do you think it is, which is the bigger devil, or is it truly men versus women? And with this consciousness that women have been giving, these conversations been had, these empowerment conversations and consciousness, do you think now, my question would be, I guess, not only to you, but also to the men in the room and everyone else, even the one watching virtually, who is preparing these men for these newly empowered women? Thank you. Linda Gutlesberger, by the way.
Thank you for your question. I'd say patriarchy is a massive problem. I wouldn't like to say it's men versus women either, but patriarchy is a big problem. It's a problem for its perpetrators. It's a problem for men as much as it is a problem for the victims, which is women. But by and large, men suffer from patriarchy as well, because it produces, I think, a brand of masculinity which people call toxic masculinity in many ways, which means that then they have to perform in certain ways to be real men, proper men, and if they don't, then they're judged as less than others. It also means, of course, that they treat women in very specific ways, which is just, awfully, really. I don't even want to go into details of the sorts of things, the damage that patriarchy can wreak on women's lives. As for who is responsible, who is responsible for these men? Well, their fathers and their mothers and the whole communities in which they're grown. Because I can only use the Jamaican example again, because when I was growing up as a child, I grew up in a rural village, and the whole village kind of brought you up, right, as well as your extended family and your parents. So you couldn't be on the street doing anything bad, because somebody would deal with you on the street, take you home, then your parents would deal with you, right? So that's how I was brought up. That has been somewhat lost, this kind of wider communal parenting, I suppose you could call it, in the move to cities and in kind of just, I suppose, modern life. I suppose that's what's done it. But parents are responsible, men especially, for what their sons do, but women as well. We also bring up our sons, to believe that patriarchy is fine. This is their right. For example, they can eat before the women in the family, so the fathers come home, then they get the first out of the pot. I'm just using an example. They get the first food out of the pot, they get the best part of it, and then, the sons, and then maybe the grandma or something, and then the kids are, actually no, the grandma last, so I'd be last in that line, but the kids and then the grandma. So we have whole societies that are structured around patriarchy and the rights of men. The rights of men over property, the rights of men, of a woman as property as well. And, men continue to get away with very egregious things against women, generally speaking, right? So we live in pro-men societies, basically, don't we, Simran? So, all I can say about that is it's up to us to change that if that's what we want to do, because of course people benefit from patriarchy and they'll continue to do so.
Thanks so much, Shirley. Could I just check if Nombulelo would like to contribute anything at this stage to these questions?
Yeah, I think as Prof. Tate has illustrated, it's not a discussion of men versus women. For me, why I identify with feminist discourse is that I see it as an important vehicle for essentially all of us. It doesn't just liberate women. It creates safe spaces even for men and discourses on more recent gender discourse like masculinities to emerge from it. I believe without the foregrounding and the background of feminist studies or women's studies, as they were called previously, we might not see these emergence. I think the conversation on also who is responsible for teaching young men is something that I've also been grappling with, especially in my classes, discussing issues around social movements with second years. And every time feminist topics come up, a lot of the young men wanting to sort of double down and like reaffirm their positionality because they do feel stifled by this sort of feminist discourse and this new emerging powerful woman that arguably has always existed, but who is more open to sort of claiming their space compared to what our parents and our grandparents were, who are more open to being vocal and taking leadership roles and challenging and all of that. And I don't know that I have the answer, but it is a challenging thing to witness even within the discourse that takes place in the classes, to see this angst amongst especially young Black men, but men in general, and feeling displaced by this the system. I think allowing yourself to engage with the discourse, social media is a very important place to start, but allowing yourself to go beyond that, because with social media, you'll find a lot of responses from people who are pushing very patriarchal views, but are doing it in ways that sound very attractive. And you're like, I agree with that. I agree with that. And there might be like a question mark to the conclusion, but you end up feeling like, maybe I should debate and consider these things. And gradually you find yourself being pulled into a discourse or a discussion that is sometimes even against you or ourselves as women, in buying in these patriarchal notions. So I think to emulate a lot of what Prof. Tate was saying is it has to start with men first. It's extremely difficult, especially because of the power relations and the power imbalances, when women, especially women who've been classified as feminists, because it's turned into a bit of a dirty word now, are trying to reach men or young boys and saying, consider life or things in these ways that remove us from this patriarchal space that we're in. So it definitely has to be something that is led by men themselves, in the same way that feminism for us was led by women. And that's why we can resonate and respond to it and so closely, because we can see ourselves in it, we can see our struggles in it. So it definitely has to be a movement that is guided and led by men.
Thanks so much, Nombulelo. So we are running out of time, but I think there might be, did you want to, I'm going to take one more question here. Sorry, Clifford, I don't think we're going to make it to you. So one more question here, and then Prof Tate to answer, and then we can wrap up, if that's fine with everyone.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Professor. My name is Antoinette, and I'm representing the Sarah Bartman residents. My question is, can your book be used as an academic material in institutions? Because some students from backgrounds, they come and they're not educated on this. So reaching university, they're having actually perspectives and they're being overwhelmed by the cultures around them. So can it be used as an academic resource?
I hope so, yes. I was supposed to write a book for advanced undergraduates, so I suppose honors, and it can be used beyond that. But like any text, it demands kind of like interpretation from the person teaching. Because of course, it does start from a position where the readers are already expected to be kind of familiar with some of the things that are discussed. So that's why I mean, teaching any text is about like interpreting it for the audience that you're engaging with. But yeah, my hope would be that it would be, because I wrote it to be a book both about like methodology in terms of reading in a specific way and theory as well. And it was supposed to be a book that would say, this is the methodology, this is the method, and this is how you use it, in the chapters that follow in terms of the analyses. So I'm hoping so, but I don't know, I can't say. Thank you.
Thanks, Shirley. I believe there's also a question online, so I'm just going to take, there are two questions. I'm just going to take one briefly to close. So it's directed at either you, Shirley, or Simran. What thought or opinions can you share on how we as the Black diaspora, African or Caribbean, millennial females, overcome the still glorified legacies of colonialism and Eurocentric standards of beauty and color within society, or more specifically within academia and corporate space? As often you will find, particularly within the corporate world, that skin politics contribute a major factor to decision making, especially concerning employability. And I believe this is Tando Magopeni. Simran, do you want to take the last one?
Thank you for the question. It's kind of like a really long one. But let me see if I can just say perhaps one thing. Because was there something on appearance in there, Jenny? Yes, appearance in skin in relation to employability. Thank you. That's what I heard too, but I wasn't sure. Recently in the United States, you will notice that there's been, I wouldn't say a spate, because it's not a spate, sporadic interest in black hair in corporate life or in employment then, yeah? And a few states like, I think, California and New York, but I think others, have recently had legislation, and I think also in schools, I can't remember which state it was now, on like black hair, because black women's hair has been discriminated against in corporate life all over, the Western Hemisphere really. So, you couldn't have like locks, only very specific ones, the long, thin sister lock ones. That's what you could have. You couldn't have like thicker locks. You couldn't have afros. You couldn't have braids. I couldn't have just your hair natural and out. Couldn't have any of that. What you had to have was like straight hair, straightened hair, because that was assumed to be more a professional look. So, places like New York and Los Angeles, as I said, states in the United States have outlawed hair discrimination. Hair discrimination extends all over. Like in South Africa, we know this from, what was the high school here? Was it Pretoria Girls High School? Yeah, we know that one. Also, in the United Kingdom, there have been cases of kids being barred from going to school because, for example, one young boy had braids, and their teacher thought that that was more about gang and criminal activity to have your hair braided, rather than it just being a normal black hairstyle. Kids in Florida schools have been banned from school as well for the same reason, because they had their natural long hair just out, big and bushy. They weren't supposed to have it big and bushy. It was supposed to be contained, and the teacher was there cutting the child's hair in the class, which, as you know, as black women, don't touch my hair, is a big thing. What interests me about black hair itself is like, why is it so problematized? It's only hair. It's just hair, that's all it is. So what is the problem with it? I don't have a problem with mine, as you see, mine short. But I've also had it straightened, I've had it permed, I've had it like in braids, I've had it just natural twists, you know. It's just hairstyling. So what's the big deal? So it's really about how white supremacist systems and colonial systems as well still have traction today. So things are put in school rules, for example, at Pretoria Girls High School, about like how long your hair should be and how it should be, how the braid should be, how many braids you could have, all this kind of stuff, right? So it's presented as rules, but these rules impact us much more differently than white students, for example. And it's the same in the UK as well. School rules impact black kids differently. You know, because like, for example, I don't know of any school in the UK, but I might be mistaken because I don't know everything about the world, as you know. I only know a bit about a bit. Anyway, there's been no school in the UK, as far as I know, that's banned white children from coming to school with a haircut that could be seen to be like a National Front haircut, right? A white supremacist haircut, which is like a buzz cut, short everywhere kind of thing. I don't know of any school that's done that. But if you have braids as a black kid, well, that's really a problem. Yeah.
Thanks, Shirley. Simran, and then Nombulelo, if you'd also like to come in afterwards, please do.
Okay, just to add to that, in academia, in the corporate world, in any workspace, we can always empower ourselves individually, like reading, engaging with these discourses, understanding the complexities of these discriminations. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that these discriminations, these associations with hair, the connotations of hair, skin color, what is considered professional and unprofessional, that is deeply embedded in the structures of academia and of corporate, of the corporate sector, of any workplace. So as much as we can empower ourselves individually, we have to actually try to eradicate these systemic discriminations that exist. And of course, that will need collective action.
Thank you. Nombulelo, would you like to say anything on this point or any closing words?
Yeah, sure. I think on my end, when it comes to hair and aesthetic, but also beyond those things, when it also comes to discussions on the inferiority complexes, particularly as Black women, that we carry, I found that my research journey has been an interesting point for me to sort of unlearn and like really disrupt a lot of those notions in myself, particularly because with the journey of like learning a lot more about African Indigenous knowledge and how African churches, for instance, will celebrate Black skin, will celebrate Black hair. There's been an interesting sort of historicization of particularly things like hair that I've come to learn and I've come to sort of embrace. So it ends up being a point of pride for me, more than a point of shame and fear. And having gone to predominantly white schools when I was younger, that was not always the case because, of course, there was, very strict codes of conduct about how you can wear your hair and what is deemed professional and acceptable or code of conduct. it always also feels very tricky giving advice like this, because whilst your heart and mind might change or shift when it comes to some of these issues, a lot of the times the world, especially in corporate spaces, still remains unchanged. So you do put yourself at risk of not getting promotions, of being overlooked for a lot of important roles because you're seen as unprofessional. But I think through the journey of going through understanding the sense of self, affirming and accepting the African sense of self, outside of the colonial lens, outside of the colonial sort of determinations or classifications of who we are, I have personally found that there's a lot of empowerment that has taken place, especially in terms of my aesthetic and what I am comfortable in doing, and really also often not caring what